What's up, guys? Today I'm going to give you an introduction to a super fat analog brand new bass synth from Ableton. It was released in the recent update with Live 9.5 where they updated their Max4Live Essentials bundle with a killer new collection of 3 synths. If you already own Live 9 Suite or you've purchased Max4Live, that's a free update, so make sure you hop on that. There's a direct link in the description below the video. This collection unleashes a triple threat of brand new sound design weapons for Ableton Live. First up is bass, which we're going to put through its paces in this video. Second is Poli, which, as you may have guessed, is a polyphonic virtual analog synth with de-tunable oscillators. The third one, and last but not least, is called Multi, which they cryptically call a multimode synth. What it does exactly, I'm not entirely sure yet, but it's got a neat interface and produces a lot of very innovative, quirky, random sounds. More on that in another video, because today is all about bass. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example of how I've been using it in my own sound design to get some really nice, juicy, fat, thick sounding, warm analog bass. So let's check out the patch. My goal here is to get you up and running with this synth in a matter of minutes. This isn't an exhaustive tutorial where I'm going to cover every minute feature. I'm going to take an example patch that I built and I'm going to show you how I made it step by step. After that, you'll be off to the races. So here's the patch. As always, I give you guys a copy of what I work on in this video, so check out the description below and grab that and feel free to use it in your own tunes. You'll need a copy of Ableton Live 9 Suite or Live 9.5 with Max4Live to open the set. The download includes the synth patch in bass and all the processing racks that I use to dial up the sound. The rest of the tune, sadly, I can't give away because I'm getting ready to release it, so that's not included. But yeah, let's dig into this patch and deconstruct it. First up, I want to show you where the Max4Live synths install. They're not in your regular instruments directory in the browser. You have to go to Max4Live, and under here, under Max Instruments, you'll see bass at the bottom. So just wanted to give you guys the heads up on where you find bass. And actually, just before we move ahead, I'm feeling some sax on this tune. I want to add a little funk to it, so I'm just going to record a quick little riff, and we'll get right back to it. I made this bass patch using a combination of 2 bass synths in an instrument rack and a series of processing racks with effects. If you deactivate the racks, you'll be able to hear what the raw sound sounds like. You can hear the dry sound is a nice low-pass filtered patch with envelope mod and drive. Next in the chain, we have a custom multiband rack that uses phase cancellation to do a perfect split between the high and the low bands so I can process them separately. This is important for doing things like narrowing the subs to mono and using stereo effects on the mids and the highs. So here's what the rack sounds like. I only have so much time to do this video today, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on the racks, but I did include them in the download, so you guys can grab those and use them in your own music. I'll also probably do a follow-up video on the racks in more detail. Capping off the chain is a bass processing rack that has all kinds of goodies in it, like multiple rounds of parallel saturation, a specially designed multiband compressor, my own emulation of the dimension expander from Massive, and a convolution reverb dialed in to sound like the impulse response of a nightclub. Check this guy out. So now let's go check out the star of this video, which is the bass synth. And I really like this instrument. It's extremely user-friendly, and it's a really fat-sounding, subtractive, virtual analog synth. It does one thing, and it does it really well: bass. It's monophonic, so it only plays one note at a time, and if you overlap notes, the new note will steal the spotlight and kill the previous note, just like engaging monophonic mode in any other synthesizer. Let's start off by looking at the bass patch in the very first rack. So you can see I've got 2 of the bass synths loaded up in an instrument rack. And the reason why I did this is because you can't detune oscillators inside the synth. You can detune the entire synth globally, but you can't detune oscillators. And I wanted to have a detuned oscillator sound, so I used the rack to create two identical duplicate versions, and then I macroed a detune parameter. So both of the patches that you see in each instance of bass are identical, save for the modulation from the macro on their detune parameters. If we solo one chain, we can hear what each instance sounds like. All right, so up first is the oscillator section, and this is actually a 5 oscillator synth. Well, 6 if you include the LFO. But basically, the way it works is it has a sine wave, a sawtooth, a pulse wave, which is a square wave with pulse width modulation, a triangle wave, and then a dedicated sub-oscillator. The sub-oscillator sits 1 octave below the rest of the oscillators. So you can use these guys for mids and highs if you want to, and then lock down a really solid sub underneath. And the sub is a sine wave. So really it's a 5 oscillator synth, and the way that you blend these together is different. Usually what you'd do in a synth is you'd have a single oscillator and you could choose from a drop-down menu from a variety of waveforms. In this, you just turn up the dials and mix in the amount of each waveform to create your aggregate sound. It actually sounds pretty sweet. The sub-oscillator specifically has 2 really noteworthy controls. One of them is tone and the other one is through. And what tone does is controls the amount of distortion that's applied to the sub. So you can actually mix a little distortion into your sub if you want to, but you can control exactly how much in relation to how much gets applied to the other oscillators, because usually you wouldn't use as much distortion on your sub. And then we have through, which is a wonderful feature that allows the sub oscillator to bypass the filter section. This is really useful if you're making heavily filter modulated basses, because you tend to lose some sub. And by engaging the through function, you ensure that the sub comes straight to the output of the synth without going through and being affected by the filter. What this means is, similar to Serum's direct out or in Razor, the safe bass function, it just guarantees that you're going to have rock solid bass. So let's just experiment by putting the synth globally up an octave. And then we'll turn the sub oscillator up. So let's say we were using a different filter type, like say a bandpass, and normally that would really take out the subs. Okay, let's engage the through. So you have all of the upside of having that really wonderfully filtered harmonics that are affecting the first 4 oscillators, and then you still have that rock solid sub on the bottom. So really handy feature. Let's pitch our synth back to where it was. And lastly, we have a parameter down here called analog, and what that does is simulates the pitch drifting that occurs in an actual analog synth where it's difficult to keep the oscillators perfectly in tune. So if we turn that up, you'll start to get a little bit of that analog pitch wandering. Cool feature, but I'm not using it in this patch. So you can see in this patch I'm using a combination of the sawtooth, the pulse, and the triangle. And I don't need the sub because I actually have a lot of sub coming from my main oscillators because I'm using the low pass filter. Just underneath the oscillator section is ring mod and sync, which can do some pretty sweet things. I'm not using them in this patch specifically, so I'm not going to cover them, but definitely explore those because they can do some fun stuff. Maybe I'll go into them more in the future video. Next up is the filter section. The available filter types are low pass, dirty low pass, which is a distorted version, high pass, band pass, and notch. Let's just check those out using my existing patch. You've got familiar controls for filter cutoff and resonance, and one of my favorite things, a stage of drive. Having that right at the filter is a really ace feature. Over to the right is the envelope amount to the filter cutoff. So we have a standard ADSR envelope down below, and that is going to control the movement of the filter cutoff. You can see in this patch, I'm using a sustain level of 0 and a short decay to get that nice plucky feel. Now I'm also modulating the cutoff of the filter, so if you really want to hear what the envelope is doing, let's just take the filter mod off of envelope 1, and you'll be able to hear what it sounds like with just the envelope modulating the filter. So you get that really nice percussive bass sound from that envelope movement. And then if we re-enable our track automation, you can see I'm using the automation up here in the MIDI track to modulate where that filter position is in addition to the envelope. Similar to some other live devices, you can scale the envelope time, but instead of having a variable amount in bass, you can scale the envelope time by a factor of 5. So what that'll basically do is take each stage of the envelope and make it longer by a factor of 5. So it could be useful if you want to extend the way certain sounds evolve. If we move over to the modulation section, we've got a single LFO. The LFO has a fade-in parameter, so if you don't want it to start full amplitude right away, you can delay it a little bit and it'll kind of ramp up into its full amplitude. You can beat sync it or have it be unsynced with the frequency or rate knob here. You can re-trigger the LFO, so it'll always start from the same position, or you can leave it untriggered. And you can choose from a variety of shapes here, pretty standard shapes for most LFOs, including sample and hold, which is actually pretty cool. You've got 4 simple destinations you can choose from when it comes to the LFO. You can have it modulate the pulse width. So over here, the pulse width modulates the width of the pulse square wave oscillator and of the triangle. So you can have the LFO modulate the pulse width amount. You can also have the LFO modulate pitch, volume, or filter cutoff. So some pretty standard, neat destinations, definitely worth exploring. I'm not using them in this patch because I'm doing my modulation based on drawing in track automation because I didn't have an idea that wanted to follow a standard LFO shape. I wanted to draw that in custom. So in this patch, I'm not using it, but definitely a very, very useful feature. Finally, we have the master section where you can control tuning in octaves or semitones or synths. And this is the area where I'm modulating with a macro the fine tuning of the pitch. And in the case of my patch, I have one of the instances of bass modulating down by up to 12 cents and the other one modulating up by up to 12 cents. So you can have a 24-cent difference between the two sounds, which gives you a very interesting dual voice unison effect, which thickens the sound up. You also have a master distortion here, which is again awesome. 2 stages of distortion in the synth. And that's really nice because rather than having a single stage and pushing it too hard, it's nice to have multiple stages and just add a little bit at each stage. That's definitely a pro tip when it comes to bass sound design. A lot of people push the distortion too hard, and what that does is it creates a lot of the higher order harmonics, which then makes it sound really brittle and harsh and grating on the ears. If you want that warm, fat, analog sound, you want to add saturation and distortion at smaller amounts but in multiple times. So what that is doing effectively is saturating already saturated harmonics, distorting already distorted harmonics, and it just gives this wonderful thickness and texture to the sound that you don't get with a single stage of distortion. So I really love that they've put this here on the master. Right underneath, we've got pitch bend, where it's by default mapped out to be 1 octave. You can go all the way up to 2 octaves up and down, so you get a nice big pitch bend range, and by default it's set up to be an octave up or down, which is a nice range I use for most of my patches. By default, we've got glide enabled, and that allows the notes to slide into each other. You can change the time so that it changes the length of time that one note takes to slide into the other. Now, if you hit this glide button, it changes to a different mode called portamento. And what portamento is the notes will only glide between each other if they're overlapping. But there's an added bonus to portamento in that it also enables legato mode. So legato mode is when you play 2 notes overlapping and they don't re-trigger the envelopes. So in this case, we have a patch that has an envelope on the filter. I'm going to turn off the filter mod and turn on my MIDI controller. So we've got this plucky envelope sound. Now, currently, if I have it in glide and I play 2 notes overlapping, it re-triggers that envelope. Now watch what happens if we put it into portamento. it allows this nice legato playing that doesn't re-trigger the envelopes. So depending on what type of sound you're going for, you may want to engage that mode. For me, in this patch, I just needed basic glide, and I have it set up like that. Now we've also got our master amplitude envelope, again, a standard ADSR right here. You can just dial that into your personal taste. And one of the envelope scalars, again, dialed into a fixed amount of ×5. And last but not least, we've got our master volume. So there's bass in a nutshell. All right, now I'm going to show you how I have my rack set up. So we'll re-enable that automation up here. And we're going to take solo off, so we'll have both bass synths playing at the same time. And I'm going to walk you through the macros that I've used. So macro number 1 is mapping out to filter cutoff frequency. So right here, you can see the little green dot, it means it's mapped. And that's where all of this movement's coming from. So if we click on that parameter, you'll be able to see in the MIDI track all of the track automation that I did. And this was just some kind of painstaking hand editing that I did to get these sounding right. The second macro is mapped out to the pulse oscillator, which is our square wave, and pulse width is going to control the width of the square portion of that wave, and it also simultaneously does the triangle wave. So this is just mixing in the amount, the volume of the pulse. So check this out. All right, so that's pulse OSC and pulse width. And then we have the detuning. So that's mapped out over here in the master section of both synths. And it's allowing me to go and pitch one synth 6 cents up and the other synth 6 cents down. So this is up, this is down, and it just allows that nice thickening effect. When you have two voices that are slightly detuned, it creates that effect very much like a human choir. Nobody sings exactly on pitch, and it really thickens a sound. Next up on the bottom row of macros, we've got filter drive. So that's at this stage right here. And I'm mixing in actually a fair amount of drive on the filter. I've used a low pass filter here, and that's cutting out a lot of the harmonics. So I really like that buzzy sound of the filter. Let's play with it a bit. And then we have glide time. I have a short amount of glide between the notes. You can change that if you want to from the macro panel. But because of the speed of the MIDI notes, I wanted to have a nice short glide. Now we've also got filter envelope amount, and that is scaling the amount that the envelope down here affects the filter cutoff position. So I can change that right from the front macro panel. And then we've got master distortion, which maps out to the distortion on the master right there. So we have another stage that we can control. So if you turn all the distortion up, the synth actually sounds pretty raspy. But I'm not trying to make a super aggressive bass. This patch needed something that was a bit fat, you know, nice for a funky house track, and I like these guys right around here. So let's listen to the whole thing in context in the track now. It's also killer to use macros for doing things like filter modulation because of the ability to scale the modulation after the fact. Let's say I draw in all this mod down here and I modulate the filter directly. If I decide that the filter modulation is too much, I have to go back and correct all my editing by hand. Gah. With macros though, I can simply open up the macro mapping browser here and I can find the parameter that's being modulated and I can edit that. So let's put this synth back on solo again. So let's say that is modulating the filter too much for my taste and I want a subbier patch. I just scale down the amount of mod that it's doing on the filter. And that just gives me so much control, basically non-destructive editing. So yeah, macros for the win, for sure. Okay, so let's recap what we covered today. We did a flyby of the bass synths interface, touching on how to build up your sound with the 5 oscillators, including the dedicated sub-oscillator. We covered the ways you can further dial in your sound with the pulse width mod, the tone, and the through controls on the sub-oscillator, allowing it to bypass the filter for that guaranteed rock-solid sub. Then we looked at the filter section and filter types, including the sweet filter drive parameter, as well as the modulation sources and destinations and the master section. Finally, we looked at how you can use instrument racks and macros to build up thicker modular sounds and really flex the full power of this synth. I'm sure you guys are stoked to start using these in your own tunes, and I'm excited for you to try it out. Don't forget to grab the download of this bass patch and those special processing racks that I built for you so you can amp up your own library and tweak them yourself. Just check below the video for the download link. If you guys have liked what we covered here today and you want to get deeper into synthesis and work on your bass sound design skills, then come check out my Blitz Bass Sound Design Ultra class back on my site. We do all the ninja tricks and pro tips for making super hard-hitting, heavily engineered bass for electronic music. I've got a whole playlist of free videos on the course product page on the site, so click the link and check them out. Thanks for checking out the vid. I wanted to give you guys a full tour of both of those audio effect racks that process the output of the synth, but I don't have time in this video, so what I'm going to do is film a second video and pop it behind this one in the playlist, and you guys can just watch that next video and check it out. I'll give you a full tour of both of those racks, and don't forget you can download those in the pack in the link below and use those in your own tunes. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel to stay frosty on all of our updates, and I'll catch you guys next time. Cheers.